Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transfer Show here on Anfield Index. I'm Trev Downey. I'm joined, of course, by Dave Davis to talk about, I'd like to tell you, flogging a dead horse, because there's nothing really out there, because that has been our default setting for a few windows in a row. But no, it's all happening. Lots of wild things being talked about, and some things becoming very, very close to concrete as well, both in and out. It's literally, I know it's an overused phrase, but it's a hell of a time to be a Red, Dave.
It is. This is almost the opposite of what we're used to. We've had windows where we're like scrambling around, going like there's maybe a loan or stuff like that. Now, even in the last hour, I was thinking I was going to eat a nice sort of choc ice just before we, because it's warm here, just before we got going. And as I'm eating that, they're still dropping bombs from Pornstein and all that, aren't they? There is so much going on. It is unreal.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I had a Magnum because why not? It's a lovely sunny day. As you say, bombas left, right, and center. Let's just get straight into it because people are going to be eager to hear what we have. And to be fair as well, there is a lot across, especially people who are into the Twitter X space. There's a lot floating around. Let's start off with the PSR story, which may not sound sexy to some people, but has quite important ramifications when we get to what will be our second story around a dream signing striker. So you had a chat, I think, with journalist pal of yours of late. You can name check him and just go through the details here around the PSR deadline of the 30th of June and why it might be relevant.
Yeah, there's two big numbers here, 48 and 30. And as it's got out on the screen there, shout out to Lewis Steele, who the little bugger postponed me today. So we've got him tomorrow, ladies and gents, to fully explain himself and justify his decision. But as he tweeted at 7 a.m., you feel like you had an inkling, didn't he, Trev? It's a big 48 hours for Liverpool as record signing. Florian Wirtz is jetting to England. And we saw him land, didn't we? Manchester Airport, 4:45 on the tarmac. Didn't see the Mercedes Vito, which was a little bit of a shame, but maybe some of the listeners have got pictures of that and they'll be going around social media. So that one, we're just waiting for the coverage of that and looking forward to that tomorrow, we should say as well. Also, as he mentioned, Milos Kerkez. Now, in his article, Lewis said that that's pretty much agreed around 40 million. It's just like small minor details, but that's fully expected to be confirmed very shortly. And then, that little bit of the tweet there on the screen, ladies and gents. Next up, balance the books with sales and go for a number 9/centre-back. Well, it's interesting what's been developing today, hasn't it, in that regard? Almost a spoiler line. And just to finish it off, the second part of that tweet was about Andy Robbo. So we're waiting on his decision, which I think everyone knows what will be coming realistically, but we're moving towards that sale potentially at the same time. And the reason, you're right, we mentioned the 30th. It's easy to forget the 30th is almost the accounting deadline, if you want to call it that, from the Premier League, isn't it? The PSR deadline where clubs file their accounts. And a few might say, well, hold on, aren't they doing a new system? Well, there is a shadow system the Premier League are operating, but right now for this campaign, it's the 30th of June that the books close for this season, which means, Trev, if clubs are going to need to, quote unquote, balance the books or make a big sale or maybe give one of their big players to another team, they've not got too long to get it done, have they?
Now, who on earth could you be considering in this conversation, Dave? Because that's really that's where I was driving the bus in terms of my introduction to this section and leading into our next story. I think it is important for people to be aware that clubs will be wanting to do things because of the rules that exist. Let's just address the elephant in the room that is the Isak story that won't go away. And, I don't know if you saw this, but we had a lovely clip from our last show, which got put up courtesy of someone from our Gibbo on Twitter. And it was deliberately put up there, I think, to, let's just say, farm a bit of attention. My God, I had to mute the conversation. Lads were coming out left, right, and centre in absolute disbelief and disgust at the idea of Isak to Liverpool. And what our story had been originally was that Newcastle were interested in Jota. I literally had to mute it because there was so many people coming out of the blue to give me abuse and you abuse and Anfield Index abuse and everybody else. We're simply saying what we have been told. Now, the Isak thing becomes a live prospect here in relation to your first bit of info. Just spell it out for folks so they know.
Yeah, I think it's been all across Twitter, X, any social media that you use, hasn't it, about the potential of Alexander Isak to Liverpool. And there's a few things just to be crystal clear on. It still feels unlikely, doesn't it? Because of the fee, the position Newcastle are in, as we said before, with Champions League. Are Newcastle willing sellers? That's the other question. You know, there's a lot of things. We're not saying this is likely, but you've just got to look at where the traffic's heading over the last few days even. You've had Romano talking about it as it's Liverpool's dream signing still, as we've said, that Alexander Isak comes to Anfield. You've had TalkSport, be it Alex Crook, Ben Jacobs mentioning that, you know, you can't rule out Liverpool from this. Even at a record signing, they wouldn't be against it. It shouldn't just be the fee mentioned there. Lewis Steele as well has mentioned in recent times that, you know, you cannot rule out, not saying it's likely, but cannot rule out Alexander Isak, and even suggested something around 130, 140 million could be possible at the same time as well. So all that comes into the mix, and probably like a million other different people. We've been digging today, haven't we? Trying to get info, is anything on it? And God, I'd love to tell you he was on the way in Mercedes Vito right now, but we don't have that. What we do have, though, as you know, Trev, is that from our info, Alexander Isak wants this move and has told Newcastle he wants this move at the same time as well. So that's maybe a starting point. It's important to say, does it make it likely? No, we cannot say that. But the one thing, as we discussed before we came on air, the big thing about this move so far, and I'm saying so far because things can change in 24 hours, no one shut it down, have we? We've not had bad news peers. We've not had no one's come out and said, this is pie in the skies, a load of nonsense. I don't know where we're getting this from at all. It has not been shot down yet. This could well happen in the near future, don't get me wrong. But for all those reasons, we ain't saying it's likely. You cannot discount Alexander Isak ending up at Anfield just yet.
It's tremendous for so many reasons. It's interesting the way you frame that too, because the Alvarez link was sort of tamped down a lot, I think, by the concept that it was going to have to be some sort of a swap, and now it looks like Darwin maybe headed elsewhere, so less likely, even though he is, I think, for both of us, at least level with Isak in terms of people you'd love to bring in. But you're right. The fact that it won't go away, the fact that it hasn't, because we know these guys are usually, it's I won't say it's their favorite thing, but they can't wait to wee on the parade, shall we say. So look, it is interesting that it's still live. But of course, it's almost as interesting that we are making this statement of intent in terms of targets that we want. And you'd like to think, and you and I were speaking just before the mics went live here, that say we do miss out on Isak, because like you said, likely, no, not likely, that's not a word I'd use. But say we do miss out on Isak, that there must be a similar statement with money of a similar level for some other similar target. And if we take out Alvarez, it brings us to Mr. Ekitike, who we've been told is very interested in the move to Liverpool. And whereas he's not in that kind of top tier star level of immediate plug and play, I think an awful lot of people rate him very highly. However, there's a hefty old price tag associated with Ekitike too, Dave.
Yeah, it does feel like if Liverpool have to start working down the list, if you can't get Isak, then Ekitike is up there. And all the suggestions are that, again, from digging, everyone wants Liverpool. Isak wants Liverpool. Ekitike wants Liverpool. It's almost like everyone's waiting by the phone, as you said, waiting for that call. And can we do the deal with the clubs? And it seems quite clear that Ekitike wants Liverpool. Hence, there's been no move to Chelsea at all yet. United approaches have been rebuffed from him as well. He's almost waiting until he knows that it can't be done or the call comes through. Now, as you said, people have been, I love when people play around with the figure, because sometimes people love to quote 100 million euros, don't they? And then the next time people are saying it's 84 million quid, which, depending if you get them at Tesco or Asda, are probably about the same, really, aren't they? So it's all about, you feel, if it does go down to Ekitike on the list, can we knock that price down a little bit? It will be interesting to see. And you do wonder about this as well. People will be mentioning Osimhen, like we've done before in the chat, haven't we, around the Nunez story and different bits, which we'll come to as well. But everyone wants Liverpool, Trev. This is almost, in the best possible way, a very different situation to the last window. And I just don't know what's going to happen. As I said to you before, I would not put serious money on which is the next attacker that ends up at Anfield. But if you're asking me what our info is, Isak and Ekitike want it to be them.
So, in the vein of exciting things, if you get a chance, check your Twitter DMs there and you'll see I forwarded a photograph. It's not a Mercedes Vito. It is, in fact, a Volkswagen of some sort. But through the blacked out windows, you can see the lurking little head of a certain German lad who may be joining us now. It could be photoshopped, but again, everybody's mad for that first picture and to see it and prove that it's real. We're no different. So if anything is happening during the show, folks, we'll bring it to you, and Dave can decide whether or not that's worth blowing up the photograph and popping it into the chats there. But we will move on because we have so much to get through here, and there are going to be obviously many more, I think, than people originally thought, outgoings, with such an intention to spend apparent from the club. The story we should start with here is the one that's very, very big at the moment and being given the added heft of the Joycean approval, and that's Joel Quansah to Leverkusen. But there are others as well linked to that England under-21 team in terms of Harvey Elliott, at least anyway. And more stories are in Harvey today as well. I saw several of them. I was talking about them in the Daily Red too. Will you start us with Joel Quansah to Leverkusen? This is one that's making people very, very uneasy, Dave. People who rate him very highly and are struggling to see any sense in this and talking about buyback clauses and all the rest of us. Walk us through the reported fee that Leverkusen are willing to pay, and then we can go out of that and into the Harvey Elliott stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this was literally an Ornstein bomb about, 20 minutes or so before we went live, wasn't it? That Liverpool are on the verge of doing this deal, aren't they, with Bayer Leverkusen, 40 million or just north of 40 million euros, which translates around the 33, 34 million pound mark. And if you kind of think about the way we've done business, and we're doing a lot of business, aren't we, with Bayer Leverkusen this summer, in essence, it's only a little bit more than we've paid for Jeremy Frimpong, isn't it? Do you remember he was about 30 million quid with his release clause? So it's quite a similar amount, sort of moving the players between the club, almost like chess pieces, doesn't it? So everyone's expecting this to now go through. And I'm going to be honest on Quansah. It's quite clear Arne Slot doesn't fancy him. I think people have forgot that when Joe Gomez was fit for that brief period this season, he was the sub that often came on for Konate or replaced him. Quansah, when they've all been fit, has been fourth choice. His minutes have been so limited since he was taken off at halftime against Ipswich. So he wants to play. He's got a chance, or he thinks he's got a chance of getting in that England World Cup squad as well, hasn't he, Trev? So he wants to play right now. And he talked the other day, if people forget, about taking that next step. So the next step is go to a side, play regularly, set up for the World Cup. So it just works in that regard for him. And like you said with Harvey, it is going to be fascinating what happens with him, because I know you mentioned it on Daily Red. There's various stories in there, inquiries from, we've had Villa, Forest, Wolves, Newcastle at one point as well, although that was under Paul Mitchell previously. So there's plenty of interest there. I suppose as a few of the reports say, Liverpool clearly advertising a fee north of 40 million. It's interesting, what will teams pay for him that way? I mean, he did all right at the England Under-21 Championships, but he came off at half-time last night. It wasn't the best performance from in that way against Germany. And then the other one still in England Under-21 camp, Tyler Morton, which it seems to have gone a little bit quiet on offers for that kid as well. So we'll see if anything arises there. But it's looking clearly like 3 Reds are in the England Under-21 camp, and not all will be returning home this summer.
Yeah, remarkable to see how close this Quansah thing looks to be getting all of a sudden, from being something that was dismissed as a silly rumor to, like you say, getting the Joyce stamp. It's very, very interesting to watch. The Harvey stuff, of course, still very vague as yet, and it's not going to be down to this under-21 tournament. People have a huge sample size of Harvey Elliott, just not recently, alas, because he went from being a Klopp regular to an Arne Slot bit part merchant. So that's had a hard impact on him, and we should be realistic, I think, about transfer value in that regard. We can all say, we can project what we think as Liverpool fans we've seen from him over the years, but other people may not have that front of mind, if you know what I mean. Our next story that we want to get to, our next 2 stories really, are a bit further outgoings. And we'll start with Endo and Kostas Tsimikas. Both of whom seem to be either saying they definitely want to stay overtly like Endo has, or talking about how they're quite happy like Tsimikas has. But you can't help but think, Dave, that both of them might be valuable pieces in whatever chess maneuvers the club are playing financially. Is there anything real to this? And obviously then why not roll in Luis Diaz here? We can bring him back towards the end because there's some Barca-related news that might be relevant. But it looks like Diaz as well, and just reading between the lines with some of the things he's been saying, might also, well, we know he's weighing up his options. He's been clear about it in interviews. So let's just focus on those 3 first, and then we'll take another 2. But Endo, Tsimikas, Diaz, in that order.
Yeah, there was a few in Discord talking about this morning, and the info I got, which I put in there as well, is that this is almost a situation where Liverpool are wondering how much they're going to have to play hard ball, was the expression I used. Because, as we've said many times, the plan for this summer from Liverpool is to naturally, and I adore some of these players. I love Endo, I love the gum shield, the whole mantra and everything he does, but there's no real future for Endo at Anfield or Tsimikas really under Arne Slot. Doesn't mean they're bad players. They're just not fancied by the head coach, aren't they? There's no real future there. And especially with the additions that are being made, it looked even less of a chance in that regard. So people are naturally, or I think we're naturally expecting stuff to unfold. But in both their native countries, they've kind of come out with interviews, haven't they? And it's interesting what they've said, that Endo with the, I'm staying, why would I want to play anywhere else? As though, why are you asking me that? But he did finish his interview, it's interesting, saying, I am staying for now. So it's interesting to see how the summer unfolds and what will happen there. But we all love Endo, great character, but you just don't see his minutes, do you, in that regard? And Tsimikas, interestingly, as well, because, I mean, not being disrespectful, but you look at the clubs he's been linked with, like Wolves, Leeds, clubs of that ilk, who he would clearly start at, wouldn't he? He'd be a great player, a great signing for them. But as he said in his homeland as well, I'd rather play 27 to 29 games here than at 40 or more at another club. And he actually said, you saw how much he loves Liverpool in his interview. He actually used this word as well. Liverpool are like the Broadway of football clubs. Like, there's a lot to like about Tsimikas and Endo, isn't there, in terms of their attitude, what they bring. However, why this is going to sound mean, that doesn't translate to what Liverpool's plans are, does it? That we know who's coming in. We talked about Kerkez, and those bits. We talked about potential midfield additions and the rework there. You just don't see them getting any minutes or any real options. And Liverpool are clearly looking at potentially moving those out. But now if they're saying we're not going anywhere, how hard ball do you play, Trev? Because, I mean, look at Chelsea last season when their players did it. They sent them to train at leisure centres, didn't they? Removed their lockers and all those types of things. We're never going to do that. We're never going to go to that end of the spectrum. But at the same time, we are the opposite end of, or we're not anymore, of the old Jurgen Klopp. Like, no, we're all in it together. We're well away from that, aren't we? So you do wonder how this navigates, and Liverpool have got to be really careful in the way they play it. And Luis Diaz as well. Be honest, as we've said all pretty much the summer on this chat, that Liverpool are planning on potentially selling him, that if he won't, he's not going to get a renewal from us, full stop. So if he wants more money, you've got to move to another football club. We know the message they're sending to him. It looks like Barcelona are going to take a left wing option, which we'll come to as well, which then leaves that, from what we know, unless something develops, Saudi bag or nothing really, doesn't it? Stay with us, but don't get a contract increase. Go into the football wilderness, but take a whacking great pay packet that way. So I am really intrigued, as Louis Steele talked about, sales and the priority there. If Liverpool are going to do everything they want, they've got to make sales, haven't they? They've still got to balance the books and make sure the squad numbers are right at the same time. So I am fascinated to see just how or what type of hardball they're going to play with some of these players.
You fancy, don't you, that if anyone's going to be on the receiving end of the hardball, it will be Luis Diaz, because he is the one who has the highest likely incoming for us. And if someone like Endo wants to hang around and isn't on massive wages, you could see how Arne Slot would be okay with it. You could see how he'd be okay with the Tsimikas thing as well. I see lots of chat over and back that I'm familiar with in real life conversations as well about, well, we can't do too much change of the squad. And that's where we were as well, Dave, until things started happening. And now it looks like this might actually be this wholesale change that we were slightly giddily predicting months ago. And now, well, a couple of months ago, and now it seems to be very much a thing. There are two other lads that I want to talk about in terms of outgoings. Before we might get actually to one more, but let's talk about Darwin Nunez and Federico Chiesa. And it's tempting to put Chiesa in the same sort of bracket as Endo and Tsimikas, but he's not at all, because he doesn't have the longevity of Liverpool career that Tsimikas does, and he is, again, not as valued as a useful chess piece as Endo is, it seems, just judging by the season gone by. Lots of people talking about getting him a proper pre-season, and who knows what could happen. And the lad's clearly a talented footballer. But then the other way of looking at it is, well, maybe we could get a little bit more for him now than we paid for him. And Darwin Nunez is the second piece here. We've all known Darwin's on the move for a long time. Darwin has been on the move since last Christmas, when we decided to not let him move. It was always going to happen. And now Napoli are very strongly linked with him. I wonder, will PSR come in to this conversation?
Yeah, you'd be astonished beyond belief if these two are still at the club come the summer. And as you mentioned there, he's on the screen, Chiesa. Gattuso, the new Italy manager, talking about him, saying he must play more. It's important. Our doors are always open, but we need Fede to play on a more regular basis. And it's World Cup year. We know he wants to go back to Italy. He wants to get a move there. So Liverpool are just now trying to see, and it looks like Napoli are possible, what's the best deal they can do for that. Again, the info's not really changed, though, Trev, around it was looking at, paying part of the wages. They weren't getting the loan with the obligation and that. So we'll see if anything develops more around Napoli. And obviously Napoli can't lowball particularly, because we know they've got that Champions League money coming, haven't they? They've just won the title there, Serie A. So that comes into the mix. And as Di Marzio and even Romano's reported again today, they are still trying for Darwin Nunez. That there's potential for agreement with the player. The only thing I don't like, and this is where we always thought it could fall down a little bit, Napoli may like Darwin Nunez. Napoli may be able to agree a deal with wages-wise Darwin Nunez, but then there's the fee for Darwin Nunez when Liverpool are clearly looking for around 70 million quid. And I even saw suggestions from various Italian outlets that Napoli are talking around the 50 million quid mark. Now, there's gaps to bridge sometime, and you never know. But I just get the feeling that ultimately Darwin won't end up at Napoli. I just feel Liverpool will almost set a marker of saying, what's the minimum we will accept? And I do think that's important to say, because there's clearly other striker targets that we're looking at, and you do feel those are linked to getting Darwin out and getting that portion of money for the first down payment, as it were, on potentially those players. But I am intrigued just to see what the fee is with Darwin. And just as a gut, this doesn't mean it's fact. Based on what we're hearing, I would be surprised if he ends up at Napoli right now.
Well, that's really interesting that you go there, because somebody's put in the chat, well, Diaz isn't going to leave because Barca want Nico Williams now. More of that later. But I guess the phrase I would say in response to that, I think it's Jono, is other clubs are available. And, these are the initial links. As the summer wears on, we are aware that we have an asset there, and clubs will become increasingly desirous of their own asset. And someone will pay a fee for Darwin Nunez that will be acceptable to Liverpool. And of course, maybe as the summer wears on, Dave, Darwin Nunez, Luis Diaz, both start to think, maybe I'll just go for the money. Maybe the money's the thing. So I think you can't, it's so early in this second window that we can't, the initial stories are great. The links are great. But if clubs are hardballing us for a fee, you just park it, don't you? And keep a steady hand, I guess, Dave. What do you reckon on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll almost have an idea, like you said, won't they, of what's the minimum we'll accept? What will we do business at? And sometimes it might be like, okay, we could probably get more, but we'll take the minimum if it allows us to do a deal now, for the targets we want in that PSR window. But if they aren't absolutely dependent on that, they think they can make the figures work. Edwards, Hughes and others have proved before, or Ward, sorry, proved before, that they'll sit on the hands a little bit, won't they? They'll just keep the powder dry, so to speak, and wait for things to come in if they don't hit that minimum bid they're looking for. Nunez is the one you still feel could be crucial to everything we want to do. So it will be interesting to see how that one develops.
Yeah, so many people. And I don't think they're naive enough to have banked on a huge amount of money from Saudi Arabia for Nunez. But part of me worries that they have. I've just put Adam up on the screen there because Adam's bored. He doesn't like the idea of tracking flights from South London and from Newcastle. Dude, you're going to have to pivot into Mercedes Vito tracking, Adam. If we get these players, it's all good. Let's finish with the South London reference, Dave, because this is the other one that's been very, very, very dominant today, and it's the Marc Guehi story. There have been links going back since Adam was a boy, not the previous Adam, about Marc Guehi to Liverpool, at least a couple of windows as well. But it seems now as if that might be becoming real. And I think one of the reasons why people were considering it might be a real thing in the past, apart altogether from someone said, well, he's too short for Liverpool. And I mean, I guess that. But the main one was that some people were fancying they could see Joe Gomez go in the opposite direction. I'm not sure what I make of that. What do you make of these Marc Guehi stories? And is there a Gomez link at all?
Yeah, I did the Daily Red yesterday, and I said on the Daily Red that we'd even got an update that day that Liverpool were back in talks with Marc Guehi's agency. And it's funny how things just seem to have accelerated. And it almost feels like we're in a house buying chain now, doesn't it? As though one player's got like three players have got to move to almost join the dots and stir it around to end at the destination. Almost like, when there's those house purchasing chains, like the young couple with the baby from Bromsgrove want to buy the house from the old spinster with the cat. So then the bachelor lifestyle guy can move into the duplex, and it all feels like we're moving it around a little bit. And it does feel that now that Quansah looks like he's likely to depart, that probably explains why this sort of link has come to life all of a sudden to us yesterday. It is interesting to say his agency is the same as Anthony Gordon's. So Liverpool are in active talks with that agency already. So,
why?
Yeah, indeed. One maybe to like, one maybe to lot night. But for an England international, a year left to go on his deal, got that experience as well. I think this is a great move personally, because it's clear that Slot doesn't fancy Quansah, no matter what anyone thinks of him. So to get Guehi in, minimum worst case it gives you, Trev, is cover for Konate. And if Konate does depart for any reason, as it may well possibly do, you've got another ready-made centre-half. Even if you don't think he's as good, and everyone will have opinions, a ready-made senior centre-half to go. So that is absolutely brilliant for me if we do this deal at the right price. Gomez, yeah, there's quite a few links kicking around for Joe Gomez, and people saying, as you mentioned, Crystal Palace have been mentioned. Sunderland were again in the mix, which I found very odd, but quite Villa, like a number of clubs have apparently got interest in Joe Gomez. Again, though, it just comes back to what we said last week. Who's going to pull the trigger for Joe Gomez, especially with the talk of 25 to 30 million? Now, as I'm saying this, please, people, I adore Gomez. I think he's a great player, on his day. I think he's got his real uses. He can cover anywhere across the back four as well, can't he? He's got real value there. But the injury record is, well, it's just known. It's just fact, isn't it? So I am still wondering which club would pull the trigger for Joe Gomez. It almost feels like, again, from what I've heard, that he is on people's lists, but it's as they start maybe missing out on targets, like Joe Gomez comes down on the list again, if that makes sense. So a lot of people have said that. And the other theory that's doing the rounds, I'll be honest, I'd forgotten until this was said to me today. Crystal Palace made a bid for Ben Doak, didn't they? Do you remember in January that about 70 million quid? There's rejected. So people said, could that be in the mix? And I've not heard anything on it at all since then. I'd be lying, but it's a fair sort of valid theory worth putting forward. But I think it does have to be in a chain, as in, I'm almost jumping into the next section. If we get Guehi, it's Quansah going to Leverkusen, and I'm sure people have seen the stories. Palace are in talks with Diamande, aren't they, at Sporting Lisbon, all around the 40 million, somewhere around there, round robin, past the parcel for your centre-half type of job. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. We'll see. Please, Lord, no, if it links to Anthony Gordon or anything like that. But there feels like there is a proper chance Marc Guehi ends up at Anfield this summer.
Just a little wrinkle there for that, because we mentioned it earlier on, didn't we, in terms of Fede Chiesa and upcoming international tournaments. And Nikolai in the chats mentions that Guehi might want guaranteed game time because of the World Cup. But, he was a favoured son there in terms of the international team until quite recently. If it is ongoing, I don't follow international football. So that's an interesting point too, and one that would certainly factor into it. You imagine if he's moving, he's going to be moving with at least a belief he's going to play. So very, very interesting for sure.
I think just to come in on that, sorry, Trevor, it is important to say Liverpool are always clear in their dealings. They never guarantee game time. They're always clear on agents, to players to say, like, they never you're going to play. They never do that because of the nature of competition, as they're clear. But I do totally agree, whoever's made that point. It is World Cup year, and Thomas Tuchel's talked about players needing to play at a certain level to really be in his thinking. So that will come into the midst as well. But you do then naturally, as we said, question marks around Konate. And also, as I thought, it sounds a bit Machiavellian now, doesn't it? I mentioned this on the last pod. Liverpool can put a bit of pressure on Konate then, can't they, in that regard? Well, if you're not going to sign, we've got Guehi. Good luck trying to get in the French World Cup team and everything like that, Ibu. So I do wonder, again, does Ibu come into the hardball mix as well?
I like that angle personally, because I think the club could do at least one more card to play when it comes to Ibu's situation. None of us want to see him go at all.
No.
And another just interesting wrinkle there is when Palace bid for Doak, I'm not sure that number was released, Dave, because I remember there was a lot of conversation about what Liverpool fans thought he was worth as opposed to what genuinely we could likely expect. It was the same conversation as people were having for Kelleher at one point, with Harvey Elliott at one point as well. It's that whole thing of us overrating what players are actually probably worth. I'm not saying us as in you and I or the sensible viewers or listeners we have on our show here, but they kind of chat in the ether. What sort of money do you think would represent a reasonable fee for someone like Doak for Liverpool?
For me, it was interesting. As you said, Liverpool put the advertisement out there, and especially with the Everton interest in the summer, around 30 million. But when you go back to January, the two offers they had that were Palace and Ipswich, funnily enough, were 16.5 million and 17 million, which is a long way short, isn't it, from the rumoured 30 million? Not that that was ever it was always just a starting point for negotiations, wasn't it? To me, being honest, it smacks of a Carvalho style deal. Somewhere like 20 million, maybe plus add-ons. That's what I honestly think he's worth in the market, because he's done quite well. Middlesbrough, hasn't he, in the Championship? He is Premier League unproven, but Liverpool, especially Edwards, they seem very good at selling that level of player. Probably the weirdest thing is we usually sell them to Brentford nowadays. So I wonder if they'll come in at some point under a new manager. But somewhere around 20 million, I'd say, with add-ons seems reasonable.
Yeah, and that is a fair point to make as well. The club has a history in recent years, especially with Edwards around the club, of getting remarkable fees for lads who we wouldn't have thought were worth it. This is almost the opposite in some ways.